It's hard to deny that the world is becoming a global village. So how should schools teach their students in order to foster global citizenship while also at the same time remaining true to their roots and national identity? Let's ask the future leaders of the world, all right? The Prime Minister, please.
We want the world to come together and not apart. We think the issue of nationalism is incredibly important, especially in today's context with the recent Brexit and Donald Trump presidency. Nationalism and all its problems that come with it make us very proud to stand on the side of global citizenship. So before we move on to our main case, let's define a couple of key terms. Firstly, by global citizenship, we're talking about the idea of one's identity transcending geography or your political boundaries. We think that the responsibilities and rights of one are in fact derived from this broader idea that you are all humans and we are all a part of humanity. So what exactly does it mean by nationalism? It simply means that above all else, you identify yourself as a citizen of a certain country. But let's make something very clear. In order to be a nationalist, it doesn't mean that you don't have national pride. That is to say that on our side of the house, we can still feel proud to be Singaporeans and also still be a global citizen. Nationalism is exclusive in that if we were to be nationalism, we would feel proud to only be Singaporeans. So it's not fair for opposition to tell us today that we can't have national pride on our side of the house. So let's move on to our policy for today then. We think that schools should focus more on teaching to be a global citizen rather than to be nationalism. The motion itself already assumes that nationalism is being taught in schools. Rather, we're just going to use that existing infrastructure to instead teach that we should just all be considered humans as opposed to be considered a citizen of a country. So let's move on to our setup then. Why exactly is this idea of a globalized world so rampant? We've given you 3 examples. Firstly, on the idea of modern information, the idea that knowledge is very, very easily accessible and far more than before when you were just confined into your own geographical country. Second of all, we give you the idea of communications. We think that with social media being prevalent, when Donald Trump tweets, everybody knows about it. Lastly, we want to talk to you about transport, with how easy it is for a bunch of different countries to come and meet together at the same place. We think this means that globalization is an inevitable force, and the only way to deal with that is to become a global citizen. Second of all, why exactly is education important in this debate then? We think it's because it actually allows the next generation to continue to develop. And in fact, the next generation, us as youth, means that we can influence social change in becoming civil servants or even just voting for the next politician that we want. So moving on to our case for today, we have a couple of points. First of all, I'll be talking to you about solving world problems. And second of all, I'll be talking to you about xenophobia. So moving on to my first point then, this idea about solving world problems. We think that a lot of the problems that currently plague society are no longer confined to national boundaries. For example, pollution, for example, terrorism. So we have 2 effects of this. We think being taught to be a global citizen above all else has 2 effects. In that firstly, as an individual, I no longer have the not in my backyard mentality. That is to mean that even if I'm not affected directly by this, I also see perhaps that as a Singaporean, I see that terrorism affects the Middle East, and I will feel that this is also my responsibility, and I'll be a lot less inward-looking towards world issues and world problems. Second of all, it means that as an individual, I'm a lot more responsible in that I try and solve these issues. So for example, I will donate to organizations to try and stop pollution, or even donate to organizations that perhaps try and resolve the refugee crisis. Second impact of this is a political capital you have as an individual. So first of all, as an individual, I'm able to vote. And it means that once I start caring for everyone else because we are all humans, as opposed to differentiating based on citizenship, it means that I'm going to start voting for politicians that are a lot more internationalist, meaning that my politicians will not involve themselves a lot more on the global stage, on an international stage, and that my country will be a lot better and a lot more helpful in solving these sort of world issues. So we think the logic of this substantive applies to a whole slew of world issues. For example, we give you the humanitarian crisis that have been happening. Without this idea of global citizenship, no one else would have donated to help Japan with this Fukushima crisis. Second of all, we give you the idea of climate change, in that a lot of countries will pull out of the Paris Peace Agreement, just like Trump, because they'll feel that climate change is someone else's problem. Last of all, we give you the example of terrorism. For example, just because there's no bombings in Singapore, it doesn't mean that terrorism is not something that affects me. On to my second point, the idea of xenophobia then. We think nationalism only allows you to see yourself as a citizen, which means that I'm going to start ostracizing other people who are not citizens. That means that, for example, if I'm Singaporean and I see someone who is perhaps a permanent resident or an immigrant in my country, I'm going to start othering them and I'm going to start ostracizing them simply because I was taught that above all else, I must be Singaporean, above being a humanitarian. We think we've seen this already, and for example, in America with the whole sentiment that Mexicans are not part of America and that illegal immigrants or immigrants on a whole are a very, very big problem in America. We think this is something that's very, very bad because it allows xenophobia to continue, and it allows for people to continue to be very, very mean and harmful towards people that they don't necessarily consider citizens. We think this is a very big problem in today's society, and for all these reasons, because we solve world issues and also because we prevent xenophobia, I'm incredibly proud to propose.
Okay.